these truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal.
As a member of Congress, I get to have a lot of really interesting people in the office, experts on what they're talking about.
This is the podcast
For insights into the issues.
China, bioterrorism, Medicare for all, in-depth discussions.
Breaking it down into simple terms. We hold
these truths.
with Dan Crenshaw.
The Eagle has landed.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the greatest podcast ever, where we inform you on all policy issues. And we're back to current events here on what's really going on in Israel. And look, I've had an Israeli general on. Me and my staff have talked about it. We've given you the background, but I wanted to get perspective from an Israeli Arab as well, because there's this growing narrative in the United States, obviously, especially amongst the left, that Arabs are downtrodden. They are the victims here, whether they're in Israel, whether they're in Palestine. And so let's get that perspective from someone who's actually there. So I've brought on someone to help us exactly with that. Youssef Haddad, thank you so much for being on.
Thank you for having me.
So, for the audience, just give us a little bit of your background, and then we want to talk. Then we want to go into it. You know, what's the truth? People have so many concepts and perceptions of the situation in Israel. Most people have never been there, of course. It's a hard place to understand without really being there on the ground. It's very complex. But give us your background first.
Well, you know, once you're in Israel, then you really understand everything. That's for sure. Anyway, my name is Youssef Haddad. I am 35 years old. I was born in Haifa, which is the biggest mixed city in Israel. Mixed city, it means that you have Jews, you have Arabs, Christians, Muslims, Druze. And then my parents, I moved to the biggest Arabic city in Israel, which is Nazareth, and I'm currently there. And through my whole life, my friends were Jewish, Arabs, Christians, Muslims. So I grew up in a diverse society, which is actually the Israeli society. And all my friends, when we started growing up together and all that, we grew up as, we don't care if you're Jewish, we don't care if you're an Arab. We were just friends, and we love to play soccer. We call it here football. So that's, by the way, I have no idea why in the United States you call football, and most of it you play with your hand. But that's a different issue. We'll leave it that. leave that for a different topic.
I actually don't know the history of that.
So, by the age of 18, when I arrived at the age of 18, my Druze friends and my Jewish friends drafted to the IDF. Now, the IDF, it's Israel Defense Force. It's not the JDF. It's not a Jewish Defense Force. So as an Arab, I'm not obligated to serve in the army. And I asked the question, why? Because again, as I said, it's an Israeli Defense Force, not a Jewish Defense Force. Eventually, I volunteered, and I was a combat fighter in the Golani Brigade. And I've actually become also a commander. So I hear a lot of in the United States calling Israel an apartheid country. And then they meet an Arab who was a commander in the IDF, commander over Jewish soldiers. And then we'd say, wait, but how is that possible? Because it's an apartheid country. Well, it's not. And I actually can give thousands of examples to refute that accusation. And we can talk about it, by the way.
Yeah.
So I become commander, and we actually have something in common, because just 2 months before I was supposed to finish my service, I was injured badly. I was in Lebanon, and 4 days before ceasefire, I participated in the Second Lebanon War in 2006.
Wow.
And 4 days before ceasefire, Hezbollah launched a Coronet anti-tank missile towards me. I was very lucky it didn't hit directly, me. It hit like a wall that was very close to me. So from the explosion, I was injured very badly. My foot was cut off. I had a huge shrapnel in my face and my bodies. But eventually, the best doctors, Arabs and Jews, they managed to reattach my own foot, and now I play football again and run 10K every week.
Wow.
And lately, I am... Yeah. And after that, I went, conquered life, business, and all that, studied. And at my last position, I was a CEO of a marketing research company. But then I dropped everything to focus on my work as a social activist for my society, because I saw that my society is going backward. So I've decided to found the organization Together Vouch for Each Other, which is an Arab-Israeli organization. The whole target is to bring the Arab society closer to the Israeli society, bridge gaps between Arabs and Jews, and at the same time, as we see lately, is also to talk about Israel, because we want to show the truth, present the facts, and stand against everyone who twists the facts about Israel. And we're saying it as from an Arab perspective.
So, and let's talk about that. Like, what is it like being an Israeli Arab in Israel? Like, if you listen to our congresswoman, who is, she comes from a Palestinian refugee family. Rashid Tlaib. You would think one thing. If I listen to you, you'd think another thing. And I have to assume that the opinions are mixed. But amongst there's about 2 million Arabs out of 8.3 million people in Israel. It's a lot of people. So I mean, give us just give us an indication of what it's like. I mean, do they have the same voting rights, property rights, speech rights, religious rights, or is it totally different? I mean, what's the truth?
I've actually before, with your permission, before I answer this question, I've seen a lot of when you mentioned Rashida Tlaib, and obviously there's Ilhan Omar, and there's Cory Bush and Cortez. I remember this because lately I see in the United States a lot of anti-Semitism riots and violence, and I must tell you right now, I do see a connection between their incitements and lies and twisting the facts to what's going on the street in the United States. And I'm very, very worried about that. And I really hope that someone will put a stop and end to it, because it is start to look like a very dangerous thing. And I'm saying this because as an Arab, I am telling you, it's either they are ignorant and they have no idea what's going on here, or they are absolutely lying, knowing that they are lying. And this is very dangerous, because in Israel, and now I can actually answer your question. In Israel, there's 2 million Israeli Arabs living in Israel, in the green line, what we call it. 1.6 million Muslims, 145,000 Christians, 145,000 Druze, and 130,000 Bedouin Muslims. It's a tribes mostly in the north, in the south, but they are Muslims. And each and every one of us has a full voting rights, free speech, free religion practice. We can become whatever we want. Now, don't get this idea that everything is perfect here. I'm not saying everything is perfect. And even though I'm saying that, despite the fact that everybody is twisting facts, for instance, we do have racism here. But I mean, Congressman, come on. Even in the United States, you have racism. Even in South Africa.
It's the world. It's the world.
It's the world. So
yeah.
You can't
I hate it, but it's true. Yeah.
So like, but it seems like the world likes to focus on Israel. And it's easy also, especially like in the UN and other organizations and bodies. So in Israel, you know what? Let me give you an example. I've already said that I was a commander. I commanded over Jewish soldiers. But here's an example. Samir Haj Yahya. It's probably a name that for Americans doesn't say anything besides that it's a Muslim name. Mm-hmm. But Samir Haj Yahya is in fact the chairman of the biggest bank in Israel. The biggest bank in Israel. This is something huge. Not a lot of people know that one of the judges that sent our president to prison was actually an Arab. So just imagine in an apartheid country, an Arab judge sends the Israeli president to prison because of his action. Doctors, we are only 20% of the population here, but we have more than 35% of doctors in Israel are Israeli Arabs.
Wow.
Pharmaceuticals, the pharmacists are 40%. And another thing, sports. We like sports. The captain of the national soccer team, he is a Muslim. Half of the squad, Israeli Arabs. Christians, Muslims, Druze. I mean, 15 Israeli Arab in the parliament, in the Israeli parliament. And by the way, guess who pays who paid them? It's the Israeli taxpayers, Jews and Arabs. You get to vote, you get to speech, you have even huge positions within the parliament. You get to see even an Arab representative kicking out a Jewish minister from the Knesset, from the parliament, if he wants to, if he's running the session. So what I'm trying to say here, it's not like what you think. When I say that, it's when people see it on the TV and don't really explore about what's going on in Israel. So again, there's a lot of opportunities, but the people who are criticizing Israel, they're just twisting those facts and not really talking to the point. And if I may, one last sentence, understand that those people who are twisting the facts actually harm us, the Arabs in Israel. Because instead of focusing and saying the truth and trying to find the solution for our problems, they want to cause more problems. And yes, I am talking about someone like Rashida Tlaib, who is a native Palestinian. I am talking exactly to someone like her. She's actually doing more damage to us, and she's also making more damage to the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza than helping. And she doesn't realize that because she doesn't have to live with the consequences because she's in America, not here. That's my biggest problem and my biggest concern.
Yeah, that's powerful, man. I'm gonna ask you if we could use those clips for social media. It's powerful. And it's so true, and like that truth needs to be set up. Like we've got demonstrations all over America for the cause, and like you said, that just instigates more violence where these people here don't have to feel the consequences of it. And look, the leftism in America is, you have to understand it to understand why they take sides on this, and they view everything through an oppressor and a victim. And they've chosen that the Palestinians are the victims here, and then everything is okay after that. Like once you've decided that you view this issue through that lens, then it justifies all further extreme action. It doesn't matter what it is, and that's a really crazy place to be. But let me play devil's advocate a little bit more with you. So you've debunked the notion that Arabs in Israel don't have the same rights. They clearly do, but they are poor, right? On average, in the aggregate, economic opportunities in West Jerusalem are better than East Jerusalem. So, like you said, you're not saying anything's perfect. There's problems.
There is.
And are those problems? I mean, we have the same problems, right, in America. So
it's every society, actually.
Every society, yeah. But so how do you fix that? I mean, what's the way out of that?
I want to surprise you. A lot of people when we come and talk about. And again, we're talking specifically about the Israeli Arabs. And if you want later to talk about the Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank, it's also possible. But for the Israeli Arabs, a lot of people comes and when they criticize Israel, they forget that there is actually another side that need to be criticized as well. And this is why we founded the organization Together Vouch for Each Other. We criticize also our leadership. Our Arab-Israeli leadership right now, which they are more concerned and more focusing on what's going on in Gaza instead of being more focusing on what's going on here in Israel with us. They're shouting Gaza and not Nazareth. They're shouting Jenin and not, for instance, Lud, Ramle, Shfar'am. Those all places with other mixed cities where Jews and Arabs live together, or Arab villages or Arab cities. And we need to understand, in order for us to be in a better position, in order for us to fix those problems, and this is exactly what our goal, we need to work side by side and we need to cooperate between the both societies. And this is what we decided to do. We said that enough with division, enough being separate. We see as Israel as a united Israeli society, Arabs and Jews, and what we want is to live side by side and make sure that we fix our problems together, not by acting like we are, oh my God, we're the victim here. we are very weak. No, we're not. We can actually, with side by side, we can actually demand our rights and even have it. And that's what I want. And hopefully that in the future, the young generation, like us and more, will find the way to go to that path. And we are on the way, by the way.
Well, give me an idea, though. Like, if I have the same conversation with 10 Israeli Arabs, how many are going to speak like you? How many are going to speak like Rashida Tlaib? And how many are going to be kind of in the middle?
That's the key question. If you'd speak with them without microphones, you're going to get 8, 9 out of 10 speaking like me.
Really?
Once you put a camera, they either will not talk to you or they might even change their mind. We have a huge problem that we are seeing currently in Israel. And by the way, it is actually, now we were talking about what happened here in Israel. People that mostly they saw in the United States, they talk about the clashes between Palestine and Israel, by the way, which is not. It's between Israel and Hamas, the terrorist organization. Israel have no problem with Palestinians. Israel have a huge problem with a terrorist organization like Hamas, but we will talk about it if you want later. Mm-hmm. What I'm saying right now is, beside that, there were clashes and there were riots within Israel between two extreme minority groups, one from the Jewish side and one from the Arab side. But they both, those two groups, we have to understand that they are a minority in both societies, the Arab and the Jewish. Now, our problem is in the majority of the Israeli Arab, we are silent and we are afraid. But we are afraid specifically from the minority extremists in our society, not from the Jewish, in our society. Because unfortunately, they have illegal weapons. Unfortunately, they are violent. I have been taking death threats and curses and hate comments and messages in the last 2 weeks. Like you have no idea.
I have an idea. I have an idea.
you know what?
But I believe you. You're right. I bet you have. I mean, seriously, yours are probably worse. I'll be honest. Yours are probably worse. Mine are kind of stupid.
The thing is that it is real. It is real. Now, if you look at it just like this and not in a wider perspective, it will seem like they are the majority. But the problem is the only one who is cursing online and the only one who is actually replying and commenting, it's only them. That's why it seems like there are a lot. Yeah. Because the silent voice is not responding. Do you know where they are responding? They're sending me private messages to my account telling me, Yoseph, just keep doing what you're doing, and we're sorry that we're not, able to support you publicly. But I understand that. Yeah. My sister supported me. Do you know what happened to her? They start cursing her husband, her kid. It was terrible. I asked her to delete the comment. You know what? I have a lot of strength. I'm willing to get all these hateful comments, and if they threaten me, well, I would say that good luck to them as an ex-IDF soldier, fighter soldier. If they want to, come at me.
Bring it on.
Bring it on. I mean,
that's what I say too. I talk openly. I'm like, I'm always carrying a weapon and I'm ready for you. So just don't F with me.
But for me, if this is a huge platform to say, please don't believe that the majority of the Arabs are they hate Jews or they don't want to be part of the Israeli society. And please don't think that the majority of the Jewish people here are racist, because they're not. It's only two small minority extremist groups that you just see a lot on the online and on the social media. And it's actually, it says, this thing brings rating. When you put something like that, immediately everyone want to see on the social media. They want to talk about it. They want to share it. So that's why it feels like they're so much powerful and a lot more than us. But
there's so many parallels. There's so many parallels to what you're talking about. and what has recently started happening in the United States. And by recently, I mean maybe the last 5 years, maybe a little bit longer. And you mentioned it earlier when you gave me that great, segment on the squad that I really want to use. What you talked about what was happening on our streets here in the U.S. And there's this the term is the green-red alliance, which is green being Hamas and red being Marxism, communism, and that alliance is real. And why is there an alliance there? Well, because the essence of Marxism is about identity politics. It started out as class warfare, but it's morphed into many other identities associated with that, usually race and religion being a really first and foremost. And you're seeing that bubble up here. I mean, race relations have gotten worse, not better in America. And it's entirely because of this toxic identity politics, which in Israel has been there forever. I mean, it's unfortunately, it's woven right into your founding. You don't have a choice. Yeah. And it's really detrimental to us. One other thing I want to say is you mentioned we're not an apartheid state. And it's important for people to understand what apartheid actually was. So I'm just going to read it real quick. It's being separate, first of all. It is enforced separateness. South Africa was institutionalized segregation based on race. It banned Africans from serving in government, political office, military, or police. Marriages across racial lines were outlawed. Africans were forced into segregated neighborhoods. It came down to a completely different set of rights based on race. So that's apartheid, everybody. Everything, Yoseph, I don't think anything you just said is associated with that.
Fact after fact, you can really check me. And here I'm even ready to swear on it. If you find any of my facts being twisted or not real, I'm quitting. That's how I'm sure of the facts that I'm saying. And I'm saying it like this because I want you to understand that this is the reality in Israel. And everybody needs really just to do a research. And if not, I mean, we beat Corona. As soon as possible, you want to come and visit Israel, especially now where we have the ceasefire. And it is a beautiful, beautiful country. Come on out and see it for yourself. And talk to the people here, simply.
So now playing devil's advocate again, what the other side would say is, well, we're not talking about East Jerusalem or Nazareth. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the West Bank and Gaza. It's a prison. We're talking about in the West Bank, they can't leave. There's no the airport. Yeah. I don't know what would you say to that? And maybe if you don't mind, I'll ask you afterwards. So go ahead with that one.
Let's start with Gaza. Israel withdrew from every inch in Gaza.
Yeah.
Leaving Gaza to the Palestinians. What did the Palestinians do? Hand it to a terrorist group. Hamas is a terrorist group, and it's recognized as a terrorist group in the EU, by the way, in the United States, obviously. All over the world recognize Hamas as a terrorist group. Hamas doesn't want peace. And I understand, by the way, why. Because if there is peace between Israel and Gaza, then Hamas is no longer needed. And if there's no longer need in Hamas, how are they going to get the hundreds of millions of dollars each year? They need the money. And in order for them to get the money, they need to make sure that there is clashes between Gaza and Israel. Further than that, the hideous talk that Gaza is locked, but I don't see people criticizing Egypt. I mean, Gaza is also have a border with Egypt, and Egypt closed the border with Gaza. So why it's okay for Egypt to close the border, but if Israel closes the border, it's not? And by the way, if you're asking, wait, an Arab country like Egypt closed the border with an Arab city like in Gaza, why? Why Arab will do something like this? It's because Egypt doesn't want terrorists to go through from in and out. And obviously Israel, the same. But you know what? Let me surprise you. Did you know that more than 150,000 people from Gaza have a work permit and they can come to South Israel and actually work?
I actually did not know that. I know a lot about this situation. That's not something I knew.
The understand? That's crazy. Not only that, during Muslim holidays, Israel would give permission to Palestinians in Gaza, thousands of them, to go and pray in Al-Aqsa, in Jerusalem. People never mention something like this. Israel is responsible for the electricity, for the water. Hamas actually in the last battle, I have no idea if people knows that, but Hamas fired 3-4 days ago, fired a rocket towards Israel, landed in Gaza, and actually destroyed the electricity. They destroyed their own electricity, the one that Israel supplies them.
Yeah.
Do you understand how crazy it is? And people think that, oh my God, Gaza is under a seizure. Israel is doing. Congressman Concho, give me 5 years with the money that Hamas is taking from all those organizations. Give me 5 years. I swear to you, I will make Gaza little Singapore. The metro terror that they built, I will build actually a real metro.
Yeah.
A real facilities, better infrastructure, school system. They have beautiful beaches, but they are occupied in terror. That's the problem in Gaza.
And I think that's what people in a West Bank. It's different, but it's similar in the sense that it's autonomous. Gaza is completely self-ruled. There's no Israelis allowed in there. They were actually taken from their homes by the Israeli government. They said, you got to move. We're going to remove you from your homes. Like thousands of people. It happened.
Forcibly removed from their home.
Right.
Because they didn't want to.
And the same actually happens in the West Bank. It happens both ways, right? It's very complicated.
Yeah.
But there is this constant movement in this effort to sort of find a balance, and it's not easy, right? There's little pockets of Jewish settlements throughout the West Bank, and but these people have been there for a long time. It's very hard to just find that right solution, and so I kind of want to go ahead.
I have to tell you something. Israel more than once stepped up and actually gave back settlements for peace.
Mm-hmm.
It's the Palestinian leaders, time after time, messed it up.
Because they never say what they actually want. That's the problem.
Yeah, more than that. Look at that. Like because the West Bank is more complicated. I would like to explain about the West Bank that it's divided to three places, which we have like A, B, and C. And A and B, it's actually controlled by the Palestinian Authority, which means they, as you say, they have full autonomy and they have police and health department. I just remembered because during the Corona pandemic, there were a lot of claims why Israel is not providing vaccines to the Palestinians, and as an occupier, someone who's occupying someone, we have the responsibility to do that. But by the way, which is completely nonsense because under the Oslo Accords, Palestine gained full control in terms of all the health system and everything. So we need to understand that it's also not apartheid because it's the Palestinian Authority who is controlling and managing their own people. Yeah. But you know what? I had a conversation with a Palestinian from the West Bank. Do you know what he said? He said, listen, obviously I want my own state and it's not about the one state solution. I do want my own country. That's what he told me. But he said, if you now would tell me to choose between being under the Israeli Authority or the Palestinian Authority, I actually have it on video, by the way. I have it on video. I recorded him, and he knew that I'm interviewing him. And he said, I would prefer to live under the Israeli Authority because of one reason. Our authority is corrupted. The Palestinian Authority is corrupted.
So this is where it gets really complicated when you're talking about a two-state solution, one-state solution. And here's the issue. I've heard that a lot, by the way. A lot of Palestinians in the West Bank are like, I'd rather just be part of Israel. And that sounds good. But then if you're an Israeli Jew, you have to think about what that means. You're now in the minority. and it fundamentally changes the democracy in Israel, and so it seems obvious. So that's why maybe it's opposed.
I'm gonna surprise you.
Yeah.
Most of Israeli Arabs don't want the Palestinians in the West Bank to be a part of one state. Not only that,
For the reasons I just said, I mean, it would fundamentally change the balance of government.
Like the Israeli Arabs themselves are concerned about that as well. And in fact, if you remember, when Donald Trump, had the deal of the century, a year ago, something like this, one of the options was that to give the triangle villages, just like to pass them to Palestine, not to take out the people from their houses or something like this. They would stay in their houses. Those Israeli Arabs would become a Palestinian, and on that, all of the people, all the Israeli Arabs on that, he said, "There's no way we're doing this."
Well, which triangle? Which villages?
It's Haifa, Kfar Qasim. It's
Okay.
Arara. It's the triangle villages that they are very close to the center of Israel, center east Israel, and the idea is to just give them to Palestine, to be part of Palestine. By the way, it was conditioned by the fact that all the residents of this village or city need to vote on it and need to accept that.
Yeah.
None of them, they would say, none of them. At that week, one of the biggest websites in Israel, Arab Israeli website, conducted a survey which participated 30,000 Israeli Arabs, and they asked, would you give up your Israeli identity to have a Palestinian identity? Are you ready for the result? More than 86% out of the 3,000 people who participated in this survey, more than 86% said no.
Wow.
And only 14% said yes. And trust me, at Judgment Day, they will also say no.
Yeah, if it really comes down to it. That's fascinating. That's very helpful. It just illuminates for people what the deal is, Okay, but what's your personal opinion? I mean, this is an unbelievably hard question to ask, but what's your personal opinion on one state, two state, how it should play out? But now there's a couple of assumptions, right? For us to do this thought exercise, I think we have to have some hypotheticals in place. That hypothetical, I think, has to be that all security concerns are taken care of. Because I am well aware of what your answer is going to be, and every Israeli's answer is going to be. It's like, we can't even have that conversation until they stop doing terrorism, right? Got it. So let's assume that every single member of Hamas is now in jail and they're gone, and Fatah has like, oh, it's so peaceful now, and we're just really, we're so loving this peace. Now what, right? So what would be ideal? Just a Palestinian state? I mean, what would work?
I'm gonna actually surprise you.
Yeah, a lot. You like to do that.
I like to do that. I thought that the deal of the century, the Trump deal, was actually a good start to negotiation.
Yeah. It was reasonable. It was a different approach than what we've taken in the past, the Clinton parameters.
Yeah. Like, for instance, for me, the idea of moving the triangle villages to Palestine, that's a big no. By the way, it doesn't matter because also it was conditioned by all that the residents of this village or city need to vote and accept that. It's not like Israel or Palestine agree and that's it. And obviously they wouldn't agree to that. But in terms of all of it, it was a very good deal. Let me tell you my idea on it. It's a two-state solution, because the last thing that we need is another 2 million from Gaza and 2 million or 2.5 million, depends you ask, from the West Bank to be part of Israel as a one state. And from there, actually, then if let's see, it is one state and everyone will, because Israel is a democratic state, and then you have to give everyone full rights, like the Israeli Arabs, then very soon the demographic situation will very change, and this is a danger on Israel also being as a Jewish and democratic state. So this solution is not, it's out of the equation, because if you don't give them equal rights, then Israel becomes an apartheid country.
Exactly.
So,
the one-state solution is not tenable.
But by the way, so sorry for being straightforward, but those idiots who say that Israel is an apartheid country and doesn't understand when actually Israel might become an apartheid country, which is two different things. And sometimes I question how they become a congressmen and women. I really don't understand. And I'm from my humble position here in Israel, I really don't understand how. Maybe you can answer that question.
It's a long story. It's a long story.
So eventually, for me, the solution is two-state solution. Exactly what you said, with the hypothetically saying that everyone leaves terror and Israel secure its border and have full security. But it's actually also simple. It's a connection between Gaza to Ramallah. Palestine will exist, and the capital city is Ramallah. Jerusalem is the capital city of Israel. Point. And in terms of army, obviously the Palestinians will have a police force, not an army force, and whatever it is in the West Bank, you can have a solution. Actually, it's not a problem. Israel proven themselves more than once that they are willing to go an extra step for peace. The problem is we've seen it through the course of the history. Time after time, we've seen the Arab leaders and the Palestinian leaders after that messing it up. Imagine, I've visited in the UN just 2 weeks ago. I was in the UN, and then I saw there was a wall called the Palestinian Wall in the UN, and you see the original map that was supposed to be Israel and Palestine based on the partition plan. Do you understand if the Arab and the Jewish and the Israelis accepted that plan, but the Arab didn't accept that plan? Do you understand if they accepted the plan, what would be Palestine right now? This place here, Nazareth, would be Palestine based on the partition plan. You understand how much they lost because of their, I don't know even how to say it, because of their
stubbornness and
lack of,
and transience.
Exactly. And then you go back, you go forward in the years, and every time they decline, and every time decline. This is why we have here in Israel, even in the Middle East, they love to say this sentence: the Palestinian never miss a chance to miss a chance.
And it's sad, right? And it's sad, and I mean the violence from Hamas clearly, obviously, it hurts Israeli Jews. I mean, you got rockets raining down on you. It's not great. But I think
it's also Israeli Arabs
and Israeli Arabs, yeah. But that's my point. It's like who it really hurts. I think it hurts probably Gazans more than anybody. But this is what everybody needs to understand: is it victimizes Gazans probably the worst. It victimizes Israeli Arabs, Israeli Jews, and we just we want to, the left in America just wants to believe something different, and it's very unhealthy.
We have to say it again and again. Israel is not fighting Palestinians. It wasn't like this. And when people are talking about it and not seeing the clear picture that Hamas is actually killing his own people. Hamas is actually killing Arab from Israel. And Hamas is killing Jewish in Israel. And by the way, we've seen that they're launching thousands of rockets on civilians. And then you know what? They go and call Israel, who is picking the targets and calling the Palestinians before actually bombing the buildings,
tell them to get out.
Evacuate. And then they say that Israel commits a war crime. And while Hamas launching thousands of rockets on Israel, and they say, oh, no, it's nothing.
That's
I mean,
crazy.
come on. Would you believe that the United States would allow thousands of rockets towards your country and be silent?
No, we would. That place would not exist much longer. At least if I was in charge. I mean, there's just the amount of restraint shown is unbelievable. I mean, Granted, I mean, this administration lets 250,000 people across our border, no problem, in the last 2 months. So who knows what they would allow? But I look, I mean, even Joe Biden, I do think if they were launching rockets, it'd be a different story. It really is an unbelievable. It's unbelievable how false the narrative has become. I mean, this is what just like I just can't understand. And again, it's deeper, right? It's much deeper than just ignorance. It really goes into deep-seated narratives that are rooted in Marxism, and the narrative building, and Israel's a victim of that. Of that kind of worldwide growing, because look, the longer we're away in history from Marxism, the more society forgets how bad it was, and is more willing to embrace it again. And I think as human beings, I think we're going to forever have this problem, because it is natural to want to be tribal. It's natural. And it's deep seated in our brains. Look, our brains are no different than the people who cheered in the Roman Colosseum as lions were ripping apart gladiators. Like, our brains are the same. So it's we're susceptible to these emotional arguments, and so we're always going to be dealing with this. And it's up to truth tellers to say, look, Western civilization and the Enlightenment, based in Judeo-Christian values, works, and we're gonna just have to keep fighting for it. And the truth shall set you free. It usually does. Appreciate that, man. Anything else to add before we pop off?
I think we pretty much covered a lot of things. I just it's very important to know that the lines between Israel and the United States are important. And for the sake of this region, for the sake of the Middle East, and obviously for the great connection and an amazing connection that we have with the United States, it is very important. And hopefully that it will stay. It doesn't matter under which administration it is, because it is important for everyone here in this area.
Well, we appreciate you. And stay safe over there, okay?
Thanks for having me.